From the world of politics to the world of business, this is Balance of Power. Live from Washington, D.C.
It's the Wednesday edition with President Trump in Qatar today, and House Republicans here in Washington moving closer to a deal on reconciliation. Thanks for being with us. I'm Joe Mathieu in Washington alongside Kailey Leinz. I missed you. You have so much to bring me up to date on. Thank you so much. All I know is we may be approaching a deal on reconciliation, but we don't have one yet on SALT.
No, we don't. It did advance the tax package that is out of the House Ways and Means Committee this morning after what was a marathon overnight markup. Yeah. And despite those, 16 hours of shooting down various amendments and figuring out how to get this bill through the committee on partisan lines, still no solution on the state and local tax deduction. The speaker does sound optimistic that one can be reached, but we know that those members from blue states where this is a big issue, Republicans that is, are making a lot of noise.
Balking at this idea of $30,000 as the final number. Maybe this is just part of the negotiation as we hear on the other end of Pennsylvania Avenue. We'll find out. But of course, the White House is pretty empty right now. President Trump abroad announcing tens of billions of dollars in investments going from Saudi Arabia yesterday to Qatar today. Still unclear if this new Air Force One is going to be part of a deal, but he will be making a bit of news. A big dinner set for a bit later on today, as it seems like half of Silicon Valley follows him across the world. Yeah,
a lot of tech titans have been in the Middle East for this. He, of course, will be participating in that Qatari state dinner this hour. When we get images of him arriving, we'll bring them to you here on Bloomberg TV and, of course, describe what we're seeing for you on Bloomberg Radio. But yes, this is all about attracting investment. The White House was touting $600 billion in pledges from the Saudi government yesterday. Today, they're talking about $1.2 trillion in economic engagement, right? Is that the phrasing they're using? Not necessarily things that are firm yet, though we do have, of course, news on a big deal for Boeing.
Yeah, it's massive. It's moving the stock and unlocking opportunity after the deal with China was unlocked. This is a pretty big one. The White House calls it the single biggest ever purchase. The math gets a little bit funny when you look at numbers of planes versus how much money we're talking about, but you can't deny the fact that this is a massive deal for Boeing, and it's sending the stock to a new 52-week high.
Economic exchange is what I meant to say.
Hundreds of millions for now, more than $1 trillion maybe to come.
Maybe. So as we look ahead to all of that, we'll be live in the Middle East in just a moment with Bloomberg's Annmarie Hordern. But we begin in New York with a check on the markets on this Wednesday. Charlie Pellet is keeping track of the trade for us.
Thank you very much. They are reunited. Feels so good. Right now looking at a mixed market. Got to begin with eToro, though. Stock really soaring first day out, up by 31.25% right now. First day of trading as a public company after the trading and investment platform. And some of its backers raised nearly $620 million in an upsized IPO. Again, eToro rallying now by 31.5%. The trading gives eToro a market value of nearly $6 billion based on the outstanding shares listed in an earlier filing. Again, eToro now up by 31.2%. The Dow lower, down 90. That is a drop of 0.2%. S&P little change right now, up just 2 points, virtually flat on the day. We've got NASDAQ up 106 now, up 0.6%. The Bloomberg Mag 7 Index rallying 1.5%. The 10-year 4.52%, with that 2-year at 4.04%. Gold now down 1.9%, $31.89 the ounce. West Texas Intermediate crude down 0.3%, $63.47 on WTI. Boeing won that big order from Qatar Airways amid a flurry of deals between Gulf nations and the U.S. during President Trump's to the region. We got a whole lot more coming up with our Annmarie Hordern in just a moment. Boeing shares, though, they are gaining today, up now by 1.6%. So again, recapping, S&P 500 index higher by 2 points now, flat on the day, and we've got eToro up by 30.5%. Back we go to Washington. Balance of Power continues, and once again, your hosts Joe Mathieu and Kailey Leinz.
All right, Charlie Pellet, thank you very much. Indeed, we have our eyes on deal making today, both at home and abroad. President Trump, of course, touting economic deals with partners in the Middle East, while here at home, his partners on Capitol Hill, if you will, Republicans in the House in particular, are trying to work a deal to make sure his legislative agenda can pass, of course, inclusive of extending the 2017 tax cuts, other measures as well, trimming of Medicaid. The problem is the deal that needs to be reached is the one that seems still elusive for House Republicans, and that is a deal on the cap for the state and local tax deduction.
Yes, the mighty SALT, which we've been talking about for months. We're not done yet, but to Kailey's point, some work was accomplished overnight. It was an all-nighter. In fact, we saw lawmakers falling asleep at the dais in the Ways and Means Committee right around 5 a.m. They managed to advance legislation 26-19 was the vote in Ways and Means. Of course, not the only committee marking up legislation, and it all leads us to a potential vote on the floor in time for Memorial Day, as the speaker mentioned. Bloomberg's Tyler Kendall joins us with more here, our Washington correspondent live on Capitol Hill. Tyler?
Yeah, hey, Joe. So as these House tax writers did advance this bill, as you're mentioning, there's still some pretty big questions here, most notably when it comes to what is going to happen to lifting the SALT cap. Some big questions on the table, except for that we do know the one man that's heading up those negotiations is House Speaker Mike Johnson. And he says even as there are disagreements and tries to tell us that we could expect some sort of deal soon, they're still on track to pass this legislation by the Memorial Day holiday. As you're about to hear, he told reporters that they're making some good progress.
We're still on target to hit that Memorial Day deadline, which people balked at when we first said it. The American people are counting on us to get this done and get it done quickly, and we are on target to do it. We're working around the clock to build that consensus to get the 218 votes and deliver on President Trump's America First agenda.
Now, he mentioned the threshold that they have to reach there. That's important because these lawmakers from high tax states like New York, New Jersey, and California are really digging in because they do have leverage since the majorities in the House are so slim. Now, the current proposal on the table would raise the SALT cap from $10,000 to $30,000 with income limits. These lawmakers say that's not good enough in order to ease the tax burden on their constituents. And there might be a way out of this. In fact, we know that the current House tax bill is pricing in at about $3.8 trillion, but lawmakers were given about $4 trillion to work with, so perhaps there's some wiggle room there for a deal. Joe and Kailey, we're also watching some other compromises on this front, including whether or not they would double the cap for married couples. That's something that's been floated on the table, as well as what expiration dates would look like. So perhaps they'll lift the SALT cap, but then it just might not stay on as long.
All right, Bloomberg's Tyler Kendall live in Capitol Hill, on Capitol Hill for us. Thank you so much. And we go from the Hill now to the Middle East. We find Bloomberg's Annmarie Hordern, Bloomberg chief political correspondent, of course, live in Doha for us, where President Trump is getting ready to participate in a Qatari state dinner. Annmarie, this, of course, is stop number 2 on the president's trip to the Middle East, which in large part is about attracting investment. The White House is talking about potentially upwards of $1.2 trillion in economic exchange between the U.S. and Qatar. But what tangible do we really know about?
Well, there's more than $200 billion of what's actually more tangible deals that were done. Maybe that $1.2 trillion, Kailey, we can call concepts of a plan or aspirational. But when it comes to the $200 billion, look at the sectors that this administration is focused on. There's really a theme here throughout the entire trip, whether it's Riyadh, Doha, or Abu Dhabi. Obviously, you have the biggest military installation for the U.S. government in Doha, so no surprise that there is also a big deal when it comes to defense, counter drones with Raytheon. Obviously, we've talked a lot about Boeing, the shares that skyrocketed, although Bloomberg a week ago was reporting about this, saying 100 wide-body jets Qatari Airways was looking to purchase from Boeing. They actually upped that to 160 today when the president and the emir came out and talked about it. And then other things like quantum computing. AI technology is huge for this region right now. We are talking about traditional economies in this region when it comes to energy, oil, gas, that they want to move beyond and look to how they can transform their economies. For a place like Qatar, gas, LNG is huge. They're looking at potentially other ways to diversify and make a more dynamic economy. And that same theme will carry on tomorrow when the president goes to Abu Dhabi. NVIDIA, AMD, they potentially will be the big winners when it comes to the fact that the Emiratis say they are ready to invest $1.4 trillion, but they need access to those advanced chips.
Indeed, big week. These are big headlines you're talking about, Annmarie, and it's great to have you with us here, whether it's NVIDIA or Boeing. Hearing less talk about Turkey and Ukraine. What will those headlines be later this week?
Well, the President once again today left the door open on potentially going to Istanbul. Of course, he is in the region. He's in the neighborhood. There's a potential he could peel off and add this. He did say, you know, I have a full schedule tomorrow when he goes to Abu Dhabi. But the fact of the matter is, I think the president, if you really read between the lines, if President Putin decides to go to Istanbul, President Donald Trump will go to Istanbul. He recently just met face to face, that really remarkable photo in the Vatican, sitting face to face with Volodymyr Zelensky. He has not done that just yet with Vladimir Putin. I think if there's an opportunity to, and he's a quick flight away, he will take that opportunity. As of now, though, no plans yet.
That would be a big deal. With us live from Qatar, Annmarie Hordern. Annmarie, thank you so much. As we follow the president's travels throughout the Middle East, we have the voice of Natasha Hall, senior fellow with the Middle East program at the Center for Strategic and International Studies, CSIS. Natasha, it's great to have you with us. I wonder your thoughts just broadly on the optics behind this trip so far. It's been a story of investment, dollar signs, a different type of diplomacy than Americans were used to in the Biden administration, right down to having actual high-tech executives yesterday, whether it was Sam Altman or Jensen Huang, meeting the Crown Prince alongside Donald Trump in Saudi Arabia. How would you describe this journey, and what will it bring the White House?
Yeah, it's been an earth-shattering, I think, few visits already. I think what we can say is that this is an America first strategy. I mean, a lot of the deals that are being made also portend a future where the U.S. has a bigger role in terms of military technology, in terms of AI, than potentially China, for example. And then, you know, yesterday with the announcement of the cessation of sanctions on Syria, the talks ongoing about hopefully a ceasefire in Gaza. We don't know what will happen there. But I mean, this is really, I think, an America first rather than a Netanyahu first policy strategy. And that's what we've seen so far.
Well, and when we consider these American first policies, the attempt to attract more investment from these countries into the United States, America also has to give a little here as well. Annmarie was just talking about movement on ships, for example, for the UAE. To what extent is this, for the countries that are hosting the president, also a chance for them to extract concessions or things they want from him?
Well, that's exactly what we've been seeing. We know that Saudi Arabia, for example, has wanted some kind of defense pact with the United States, has wanted help with a civilian nuclear program as well. But previous administrations had been tying that to the Abraham Accords. So Saudi Arabia essentially normalizing with Israel. And we're seeing that that's not necessarily on the table, or doesn't have to be on the table anymore. And so this is very much a symbiotic relationship, that there is going to be hundreds of billions of dollars in investment from the Gulf. And in return, I think the Gulf gets some foreign policy wins. And we saw that with the sanctions announcement yesterday. And hopefully we see some more movement on the Gaza front today or tomorrow.
So what is Benjamin Netanyahu thinking right now after witnessing this meeting between President Trump and Syria's new leader, knowing that President Trump is not making a visit to Israel? What does this mean for their relationship?
I mean, this is truly astounding, Joe. If you think about just a few months ago, this was a man, Ahmed al-Shara, with a $10 million bounty on his head as a former al-Qaeda affiliate. And, you know, we didn't know what the optics would look like with this meeting, but they were very conciliatory, shaking hands, smiling. President Trump has said he's a great guy, strong past, things that I couldn't have possibly imagined just a few months ago. The other thing to consider is that President Trump continues to say that he is consulting with Erdogan, which I'm sure raises some alarm bells for Israel, which sees Turkey as an increasing threat with the fall of Assad, its neighbor to the north. So I'm sure there's a lot of concerns coming from the Netanyahu administration, but I still think that this is probably for the best for Israel over the long term. I think less war, less tensions in the region, it represents a more peaceful future for the country and for Israelis as well.
I do want to note for our audience here on Bloomberg TV and radio, and those joining us on YouTube as well, that we are seeing President Trump's motorcade rolling up to Lusail Palace in Doha for the Qatari state dinner. Of course, once again, for the second day in a row, seeing a lot of pomp and circumstance that comes with this trip for the president. We have our eyes on the beast, which has made the trip to the Middle East as President Trump is getting ready to emerge and participate in this state dinner, having already announced, as we were just discussing, hundreds of billions of dollars, at least, in economic deals between Qatar and the United States.
That's for sure, Kailey, as we have this live view of the president, I guess, about to emerge from the beast, as you mentioned. He's on his way to a state dinner that will conclude this day of travel in Qatar. And Natasha, I wonder what you expect to come from this dinner, if this is more deal-making or a chance for the president to put the negotiating down for a moment.
I mean, I think this might be putting the negotiating down for a moment, but perhaps longer indirect talks. We know that Sheikh Tamim, the Emir of Qatar, was supposed to have a 30-minute meeting with President Trump. It went on for 2 hours. We don't know why. We do know that the Israeli negotiators have been somewhat intransigent on Witkoff's plan for Gaza and hostage releases. So there could be some tensions there that need to be worked out. So it remains to be seen if President Trump is going to apply pressure to Israel or others to move something forward. But certainly, I think this pomp and circumstance does help, I think, to grease the wheels of those negotiations for sure.
And President Trump has just emerged from his vehicle heading into that state dinner with Qatar. We also heard from the president yesterday, Natasha, of course, speaking at the Saudi-U.S. Investment Forum in Riyadh, about how he wants to be a peacemaker as president, talking about, obviously, ongoing conflict between Israel and Hamas, mentioning the Houthis as well, what he'd like to see with Iran, but also an expansion of the Abraham Accords, making it very clear his desire for Saudi Arabia to join in. And I wonder if you think this trip has realistically brought him closer to that objective.
You know, I think it has, in a sense, even for Syria, which we couldn't have expected before. I think that there's an acknowledgement, though, that the way that things are, it would be very, very challenging for Saudi Arabia or Syria to sign the Abraham Accords, that things need to get straightened out. There needs to be a broader peace before that happens. But of course, he did mention that several times during his speech. But I think what he really was trying to emphasize was that this needs to be a region for the region. And really showing that the Gulf players can be shapers of the region themselves, and not just the United States and not just Israel. And so I think that that is a really pronounced rebalancing in the region that we don't know what to expect entirely. But I mean, I think this is a considerable shift.
You think Donald Trump gets to Turkey this week?
I mean, one can hope, I think, for peace for Ukraine as well. But we do know that that Secretary of State Rubio will meet with Sheibani, the foreign minister of Syria. And so this just, I think, shows greater engagement diplomatically. So not just on the financial side, but militarily and diplomatically as well. And I think that's what Sheikh Tamim of Qatar was really trying to emphasize with his meeting, that he sees Trump essentially as a man of peace. And really trying to play up those optics as much as possible. But I think both sides, whether it's a Gulf state or Turkey, is really trying to play up their hand in terms of being negotiators, being shapers. And I think Trump is giving them those wins. Like I said, I think on every occasion that he has been asked, he has said that he really looks to President Erdogan of Turkey for consultation. So that is a significant move in and of itself.
All right, Natasha Hall, Senior Fellow with the Middle East Program at the Center for Strategic and International Studies. Thank you so much for joining us. We didn't even get to talk about the plane, the gift from Qatar. We'll have to do that with our political panel next on Bloomberg.
And make sure to subscribe to the Balance of Power podcast. Go to Apple, go to Spotify, wherever you do your podcasts.
It's 1:20 on Wall Street. We do check markets all day long here at Bloomberg. The bull stumbles, but eToro running higher. Right now, eToro, first day of trading, up 26.6%. First session as a public company after the trading and investment platform and some of its backers raised nearly $620 million in an upsized IPO again. eToro right now up by 26.2%. The S&P 500 index lower since our last update, right now down 10 points, drop there of 0.2%. The Dow down 166, dropped there of 0.4%, but NASDAQ holding on to a gain now of 53 points, up by about 0.3%. The Bloomberg Mag 7 index up 1.1%. Tech rallying, 10-year at 4.52%. The 2-year 4.04%. Spot gold down 2%, 31.85 the ounce. And West Texas Intermediate crude down 0.6%. WTI now 63.27 a barrel. Bitcoin down 1.6%, 102,887 on Bitcoin. HBO Max, remember that? It's history. Now it's HBO again. Warner Brothers Discovery changing the name of its flagship streaming service back to HBO, part of a broader strategic shift designed to re-emphasize premium programming for adults. The change will be effective this summer. Right now we have got shares of Warner Brothers Discovery. They are trading lower, and little change WBD on the ticker. It is down now by 1.4%. Again, recapping, U.S. stocks lower. S&P down 14 now, drop there of 0.2%. For on-demand news 24 hours a day, subscribe to Bloomberg News Now wherever you get your podcasts. And Balance of Power continues right now. Back to go to Washington. Once again, your hosts, here they are, Joe Mathieu and Kailey Leinz.
All right, Charlie Pellet, live in New York, the voice of Wall Street and the New York subway here on the fastest show in politics. We've got our eyes on what's happening right now in Qatar, where President Trump is now appearing, if you're with us on Bloomberg TV or YouTube, with the Emir of Qatar having just arrived for a state dinner at Lusail Palace. This is following a day of investment announcements and could include more negotiations and maybe more deal making over dinner here. We'll keep tabs, of course, on the president's evening time in Qatar following his stop yesterday in Saudi Arabia and ahead of Abu Dhabi tomorrow. I'm Joe Mathieu alongside Kailey Leinz in Washington as we prepare to assemble our political panel. Kailey, there's been a little bit of a question about some of the math that we're hearing when it comes to actual investments versus plans for continued economic cooperation. It seems to be more in the hundreds of millions of dollars here in Qatar as opposed to the $1 trillion plus that the White House is talking about for future opportunities.
Yeah, they're talking about $1.2 trillion in committed economic exchange. But in terms of the actual deals the White House has in hand to announce today, it's only to the tune of about $243 billion, a big portion of that actually coming for Boeing.
That's
a
right.
$96 billion deal, according to the White House, for wide-body jets, up to 210 of them, potentially the biggest orders they've seen for wide-bodies and 787s in particular. But interestingly, what has caught a lot of attention here in Washington is not so much those Boeing planes, but one particular Boeing jumbo jet that
used one
that Qatar wants to give to the U.S., to the president to use as Air Force One.
$400 million.
Yes.
They call it the Palace in the Sky. And it is apparently on the ground right now in San Antonio. According to the Washington Post, it's been in the United States for a couple of weeks. If this is going to happen, and we don't have any evidence that the Air Force has taken delivery of this jet, Kailey, it would require many millions of dollars in upgrades, and in fact could take so long this president may not actually get to use it.
And of course, all of that, plus backlash politically from even members of the president's own party. So that's what we get into now with our political panel. Rick Davis and Adam Hodge are here. Rick, of course, Republican strategist and Stonecourt Capital partner. Adam, Democratic strategist and managing director at Pulpit International. Both of them with us in our Washington, D.C. studio today. Great to see you. As always, gentlemen, as we consider this plane gift in particular, which the president contends is a gift to the United States, it's not about him personally. He is not actually trying to avoid this as a subject, not necessarily, Rick, trying to make sure we're all focused on his investment deals in the Middle East instead. He's taking to Truth Social to continue to keep our attention on it. Why commit?
Oh, I think he's very proud of the fact that somebody would give him a $400 million gift. I mean, like, if you assume your net value is based on what other people are willing to peg it to, that's pretty good reinforcement. And the reality is, we know Donald Trump cares about things like airplanes and homes. And, these are the brandishments of his career. Remember, that first time we really ever saw him was standing on, in front of a Rolls Royce, the king of the deal. So I'm not surprised by that. I think he's very proud of the fact that the Kingdom of Qatar would be willing to, spot him an airplane. You can imagine the conversation. Oh, I have to fly on this dump, the 747 that's sometimes called, Air Force One. I really, wish I had a plane like this. It's yours. I mean, like, maybe there's a genie in the bottle somewhere and just made it appear. But the reality is Donald Trump thinks these things, the optics around him are important. He likes the opulence. It's not typical of an American president. But he's not the typical American president, so
well, sure.
I think we can expect this.
That's for sure. Well, to Kailey's point, we are hearing from Republicans, including the Senate Majority Leader, John Thune. Lots of issues associated with that offer, which I think need to be further talked about. Ted Cruz, I think that plane poses significant espionage and surveillance problems. Adam, this goes beyond the gifting concerns and actually enters the national security space that you worked in. Are we having the right conversation?
I think
this?
Those senators are actually trying to get to what is the key issue here. I mean, take a step back. The United States should not be accepting major gifts from foreign countries of hundreds of millions of dollars for a plane for the president. It's just not only the conflict of interest rules, which are obvious, it's just the optics of being beholden to another country, giving you a plane for your president. Is just, I mean, it's crazy. But even one step further, and Kailey, you were alluding to this, the plane could cost $1 billion to refurbish. I mean, it's not just like a regular plane for a regular foreign leader. Mm-hmm. It's for the president of the United States to retrofit. And I've flown on the current Air Force One. It's not even your normal 747. There's all kinds of technology that is classified to the gilt that I don't think you can just bolt onto an existing plane. Mm-hmm. So it's a bit crazy, and I don't understand why you would take the political hit from people within your own party for a plane that you may not be able to even fly on.
Of course, it's not everyone within the president's party who seems to have an issue with this. The Speaker of the House, Mike Johnson, was asked about this today, and he was like, it's not a gift personally to the president. It's a gift to the United States. The quote, Rick, other nations give us gifts all the time. We aren't going to see Congress doing anything about this, even if they wanted to.
No, I mean, it's not worth the time and effort to, really try to protest it. And as Adam said, it's going to be a long time and a big cost to do this for him if he's president. If he's not president, fly on the plane if you want. I mean, I think, frankly, if we got a deal today that he won't run for re-election, but he gets the plane, done.
He also constitutionally can't run for re-election.
I know, but that doesn't matter. That's my point. I mean, like to Donald Trump, these things are all fungible.
Yes, they are. As we learned in the Washington Post, they actually got a schematic of this airplane. There are 2 full bathrooms, 9 lavatories, a main bedroom, a guest bedroom, multiple lounges, private office, cream and tan-colored leather seating on both decks, according to photos provided by the Swiss aviation company AMAC Aerospace. The point is here, and you made it. Not only is it going to be incredibly expensive, but this president probably won't be able to use it. It won't be done in time. So is this about something different? Is this about pressuring Boeing to cough up its 2 747s?
Well, I mean, obviously it's not a great look for Boeing that the president's going around them to try to get a plane from somebody else. Yeah. But I think this is just, if you think about the other countries in the region who are going to be looking at, well, Qatar gave them a $400 million plane. Like, do I add up? How do I try to exert my own sense of importance in the relationship if they're giving the president a gift? And I think it's important to focus on the gift part of it, because they've made clear they would take it as part of the Trump presidential library, which would then allow him to use it afterwards. So it's not like this is just like, as Mike Johnson was saying, it's not a big deal.
As opposed to it sitting in the library a la the Reagan lab. He's going to be flying this around.
That's what, I mean, again, we'll see what the devil's in the details. And I think, like with all these other deals in the region, the proof is actually on delivery. The proof is actually, do they actually put money into these certain companies? Are there actual hard assets that are transferred? Right now, it's a lot of smoke and mirrors.
Well, what we do know, and Boeing might not be happy about this whole conversation around Air Force One, but they probably are at least somewhat satisfied at the prospect of Qatar buying hundreds of wide-body aircraft from them, as President Trump announced earlier today.
Kelly's telling me from Boeing that's the largest order of jets in the history of Boeing. That's pretty good. That's fantastic. So that's a record, Kelly, and congratulations to Boeing. Get those planes out there. Get them out there.
So it is $96 billion worth of purchases that Qatar has agreed to make, Rick. That is part what adds up to hundreds of billions of dollars that the White House is touting in investment pledges from Qatar after $600 billion from Saudi Arabia yesterday. Is he walking away potentially from this Middle East trip with exactly what he wanted, things to tout on money coming into the United States?
Oh, I don't think there's any question that they will think that this was a successful trip. Billions of dollars of investment and commitments. Obviously, the devil is in the detail. What's really going to happen? We've heard commitments before from the Gulf where hundreds of billions of dollars were committed and not a whole lot really materialized. Times change, things happen, especially in the volatile region. But this is going to be seen as exactly what he set out to do. I'm going to go out and promote American investment. I would say yesterday's speech in Saudi Arabia, it went well beyond that. It was more of a geopolitical speech. It talked about the region as a whole. It talked about conflicts in the region and what to do about it. And he did not sound like a protectionist president at that point. You know, the speech he gave sounded like any other president who said, I'm going to tackle the Middle East. And we know how unsuccessful most presidents are. But he's got some wind at his back. And so the idea of cutting a deal with Iran, you know, and meeting with the new president of Syria, I mean, like, these are things you want your president to do in order to create a peaceful situation in the region, which is so important to us strategically. And he's doing that. So I wouldn't want to just lose the fact that he's out there shilling for U.S. investment when he's also doing a lot, you know, in the region geopolitically.
Interesting. This is not the way Joe Biden's visit to the Middle East would have gone or went when you're front-loading the announcement with dollar signs. What do you make of that approach to geopolitics?
No, but I think, like, when I was in the White House, we did actually, like, announce key deals or we're on state dinners.
Wasn't the first word that came out of his mouth, though. This seems to be the point of the trip.
It is, and I think that is true to Trump's brand, right? That's part of his deal. I think the important point on the planes, though, I mean, it's one thing to talk about the numbers, announce them, but Boeing gets paid when the planes are delivered. Right? Not just when the planes are announced. And this is why his tariff policy is just so backwards and I think misguided, because Boeing is going to have a hard time actually assembling and delivering those planes if they can't get the parts or if the parts are more expensive to build in the first place. So I think, like, this is why the president is sort of boxed himself in a number of ways and not able to actually deliver on the policy and on the pomp and circumstance of the deal that he talks about.
Nothing can be viewed in a vacuum, I think.
How true.
Adam's point. Adam Hodge and Rick Davis, our political panel today, here with us in our Washington, D.C. studio. Thank you both so much for joining us, and we'll have more ahead here on Balance of Power as we have to turn our focus back to Congress and whether or not the House is going to be able to figure out how to get the SALT cap raised enough to make everybody happy, get a reconciliation bill through both chambers. We'll have more ahead here on Bloomberg TV and radio.
It's 1:40 on Wall Street. We do check markets all day long here at Bloomberg. The Dow, the S&P, both lower. NASDAQ higher. We've got to begin with eToro. First day out, up 28.4%. In its first session as a public company, eToro is gaining after the trading and investment platform and some of its backers raised nearly $620 million in an upsized IPO. Again, eToro up now by 28%. S&P little change right now, down 1 point. Had been higher earlier in the session. The Dow down 104, now down 0.2%. NASDAQ advancing 0.5%. The NASDAQ 100 index up now by about 0.3%. 10-year 4.51%, the 2-year 4.03%. Gold is down 2.1%, now $31.83 the ounce, and a retreat for crude at $63.41 a barrel, down 0.4%. Warner Brothers Discovery is bringing back the HBO brand to its flagship streaming service, reversing a 2023 decision to ditch the name in favor of Max. And Nike co-founder Phil Knight has repeatedly expressed interest in buying the Portland Trail Blazers, but now that it's finally for sale, he is deciding to pass on the chance to own the NBA franchise. Knight is now 87 and says, quote, "At my current age, I can confirm that I no longer have interest in acquiring the team." Recapping stocks lower, S&P down 2 points, down just under 0.1%. eToro up by 27.8%. Balance of Power continues right now. Back we go to Washington. Once again, your hosts, Joe Mathieu and Kailey Leinz.
All right, Charlie Pellet in New York, thank you so much. Here in Washington, there are probably a lot of tired lawmakers, at least in the House of Representatives, on Capitol Hill today, because many of them had to quite literally pull all-nighters last night, including in the House Ways and Means Committee, as it marked up its draft tax bill. That would do a number of things, including, of course, extend the 2017 tax cuts, eliminate taxes on tipped income and overtime until 2028, other elements of President Trump's campaign promises as well. And it finally got through the committee along party lines, no surprise, this morning. But it did so without one issue, perhaps the issue, being resolved. And that is, where exactly do you cap the state and local tax deduction to keep everybody happy? And the people you need to keep happiest are the people who represent blue states in districts that are swingy, that make or break the House majority. And a lot of those so-called Salt Caucus members are still looking for an answer from the Speaker of the House, Mike Johnson, at this point.
Sounds like you've been to New York. So 16 hours in committee was not enough to hash any of this out. They had an all-nighter. I mean, they were bringing in takeout and wine at 4:57 a.m. Blake Moore is asleep there on the Ways and Means Committee. So there are questions exactly about how long it's going to take to get this done, Kailey. And for our reality check, we introduce Bill Hoagland. Always great to have Bill with us. Senior Vice President, the Bipartisan Policy Center. Bill, not only do you give us a reality check, but you help us lower the blood pressure for a moment. So I'm wondering if you can distill this moment as one of progress or maybe one of concern for you, because the Speaker of the House seems emboldened. He says very productive, and we might well get this done in time for Memorial Day.
Well, I do think that a lot of progress has been made in terms of the committees that were instructed to come up with the savings, and they almost every one of them has met what was instructed of them. The House Budget Committee will meet Friday morning and bundle all these bills up into one package and report it out. So it is a good possibility that it will all be on the floor and could be done by Memorial Day recess a week from this coming Friday. So, yes, I think there is good progress in that regard. The elements of the package, however, may create some real issues for the Speaker, particularly given today that we were hearing so much from members, some of the more conservative members of the United States Senate that has to take up this bill, who are suggesting that they don't like what's in there. And that will make it more difficult for the Speaker on the floor to get the votes, it seems, from those moderate Republicans, besides the point that Kailey's made about what they still, I don't think, have fully resolved the issue as it relates to the SALT.
Yeah.
Well, and when we consider the moderate Republicans who are nervous at the very least about the cuts to Medicaid, the SALT caucus, which we're talking about, then the hardline conservatives, not just in the Senate, but in the House, who do not think these spending cuts go far enough, knowing how narrow the majority is, Bill, is there enough room to maneuver if you're Speaker Johnson?
It is very tight. Of course, we cannot never rule out the pressure that the President of the United States will have once he gets back from overseas. He will put a lot of pressure on. I do think that it's going to be very nick and tuck down to the end to get the votes, and there will have to be some hard arm swinging, I guess, or bending, if nothing else, to get it through the House of Representatives. But even if it gets through the House of Representatives, I think your listeners have to understand that we still have the United States Senate, and the United States Senate will produce its own bill. And it will be different. It clearly will be different than the House. And then you'll have to have a conference between the House and Senate. And that's then they'll come back and you'll have to vote again on it.
So if the Speaker doesn't have a revolt on his hands now, he will then.
He will then, if it comes back from the Senate, much different than what the House is.
What's the Freedom Caucus going to say when the cuts aren't there?
I think they're going to have some real difficulties with this. This is going to be tough. It was always going to be tough, but when the margins are this small, it makes it even tougher. And then you just still do have the real issue about whether or not this does. As an old budgeteer myself, I do believe debt and deficits matter. So we're looking at tax cuts maybe in $4 trillion, but we're only looking at, quote, only. We're looking at $1.5 trillion in spending cuts. You're adding to the deficit. You're not reducing the deficit, and that's where the hardliners will come from, the Chip Roys of the world, and say, wait a minute, this doesn't go enough in reducing the debt and deficits going forward.
Well, and when we consider some of the things we're hearing out of the Senate, it's not just Senator Josh Hawley making noise about Medicaid. You have other senators as well who are concerned about the repeal of clean energy credits from the Inflation Reduction Act, which, with all the Medicaid and SALT talk, is not getting as much attention. But is that actually one of the things that could be the biggest sticking points?
I'm glad you raised that issue, because there are a number of those Republicans who maybe didn't vote for the IRA when it passed, but were behind the scenes saying, good.
They're benefiting from it now.
Benefiting from it now, exactly. And so that's going to be tough for them to stomach the cuts and the elimination, quite frankly, of almost all the IRA provisions dealing with clean energy programs that are in there, and the grants that are in there too. And some of those grants are out there already in the community.
You mentioned some of the changes that senators could make. What kind of changes might the parliamentarian force when we get to that stage
that's a
of
good
the process?
point.
The bird bath could bring a few items out that Republicans in the House think they need. Yeah,
it's a good point, Joe. I have to remind people, being an old Senate staffer, that the so-called bird rule really only applies in the Senate. The House can pass it with simple majority, and they can put in things that when the parliamentarian looks at it in the Senate and will find that, wait a minute, these have no budgetary consequences. Deauthorizing programs, fine, but there's no budgetary consequence. So a lot of the things that they put into the House provision for winning those votes to get the vote that we're eliminating a program, but it has no budgetary consequence. They will come. That will be subject to the Byrd rule and will come out unless there are 60 votes to keep them in. So that will also change the real nature of the Senate bill when it comes back to the House.
Well, and so all of this raises the question of the timeline here. As House leadership is still sounding optimistic, we heard Steve Scalise say this will be on the president's desk by the 4th of July. How hard is that going to be to manage if you still have to get it through the Senate in whatever form, get it back to the House, and get them to choke down whatever it is the changes the Senate made?
I would say very, very difficult July 4th. Let's be honest. If they can get this out of the House next week, they go on Memorial Day recess. The whole month of June, will be devoted in the United States Senate to getting their bill done. So even if they got their bill done in June, then you'll need the whole month of July just to work out the difference between the House and Senate, if you can do that. So I think I would push Mr. Scalise's statement to the end of July at the earliest, but even then.
At the earliest.
At the earliest.
Okay. You spoke with Lisa McClain yesterday, Republican Congresswoman in the leadership in the House, speaking to the standoff, if I can call it that, over SALT. I want you to hear what she said. I'm just compelled by the fact that this very narrow issue could potentially hang up this entire big, beautiful bill that we're talking about. Here's what she said.
There is some wiggle room. How much wiggle room, that's what we need to determine. But at the end of the day, I think both sides will come together to get this done for the American people. Because what we'll see if we don't get this tax bill done will be gravely worse than what we're experiencing now with the SALT cap for all Americans.
But Bill, if you're Mike Lawler sitting there in New York, you don't have wiggle room. And if you're a no, then this entire effort is going nowhere. What does Speaker Johnson need to do to put this to bed?
Well, I think he does have to negotiate a higher level than the 10,000 for the SALT. He has to move it up. I was surprised to hear that the SALT caucus, so to speak, rejected the 30,000. Yeah. That seems strange to me. But there has to be some place between 10,000 and somewhere up above 30,000 maybe that will get it over. I think the representative is absolutely clear, though. If you do not get this done, then the impact upon middle income, quite frankly, because of the marginal tax rates would go up, would be very devastating, both for Republicans and Democrats. That's why, and I'm sure I'm in the minority on this, that's why I think at some point, if they cannot get this reconciliation bill across the line, that there's still a possibility of simply extending the current tax law, so those tax rates don't go up next year on individual Americans.
Well, so that would mean that you kind of separate these things out rather than trying to do one big, beautiful bill. Would that be an endorsement of the Senate's original strategy bill?
Exactly. That's exactly where I'm glad you went there, because I being an old Senate staffer, and I do appreciate the work of the Speaker, of the Majority Leader, Mr. Thune. That was his strategy at the outset. Let's do what we can do, get a win, and then move on. that's where, yes, I think this validates Mr. Thune's original position.
The wild card for all of this, of course, the debt limit. And that's going to depend greatly on the X date where this actually lands. And is it a good thing for Republicans? In fact, if it lands earlier, and it has to be part of this reconciliation bill.
It does. It does. Right now, increasing the debt limit, we think at the Bipartisan Policy Center, our estimate yesterday we put out, maybe the end of July and maybe into early October. We got a range. We got to wait and see what the tax coming in on the estimated quarterly taxes come in at. But it is in this reconciliation bill. It therefore only requires a simple majority to raise the debt limit. If they cannot get it done, again, I'm probably in the minority here, they can pull that reconciliation of just the debt limit out of this bill and pass it freestanding as a debt limit. Or if they can't do that, then they're back in a situation where I think they're going to have to negotiate with the Democrats, which is the last thing Republicans want. Yeah.
Well, and it would be the first real opportunity for Democrats to have any kind of leverage since January, right?
And this is very similar to where we were in 23 when we were facing a debt limit and increasing the debt limit and ended up negotiating the Fiscal Responsibility Act, which set new caps for spending for 24 and 25.
So while we're sitting here talking about this bill, is there somewhere quietly on Capitol Hill where that component of reconciliation is being written so it will be ready?
Oh, yes. Well, quite frankly, the bills are being written right now.
When it comes to the debt limit.
Well, that's a simple
so we can crank out that page when we need it.
That doesn't take much time. That doesn't take much time at all.
I will say, I spoke with the Republican conference chair in the House, Lisa McClain, last night, and I asked her, is there a backup plan if we can't get done in time to deal with the debt ceiling? She said they're not really working on that yet because they're so confident in their timeline, but you don't buy that, Bill.
I think it's going to be tough. It's going to be tough.
Mm-hmm. So backup plan might be necessary. That said, we do know they work better with a deadline, right? So when we're talking about the prospect of the House potentially having to grapple with Senate changes, if you know the X date is looming, recess is looming too, does that actually make it easier for the House to adjust to the Senate's desires?
Well, I think that depends. One could say that the August recess that's sacrosanct in this town for members, it may be in question, and they could work on. I don't think it's going to be as easy as just saying we got this deadline here and let's get it all done beforehand, because these are big policy items in here. You just don't do them willy nilly because there's a vacation, August vacation coming up.
Even though it's Washington.
I was just about to say, Bill Hoagland, great as always to have you here on Balance of Power, Senior Vice President of the Bipartisan Policy Center. And while we keep our eye on the progress, or today it kind of feels like lack thereof, at least on the SALT issue on Capitol Hill, we also have our eyes on Doha, where President Trump is participating or about to participate in a Qatari state dinner. He is at Lusail Palace next to the Emir, participating in what appears to be an incredibly lengthy handshake.
This is quite the reception line here for the president, although he seems to be really enjoying himself. The pomp and circumstance that greeted him, complete with horses and camels, was remarkable, and the dinner that he's about to go into, I'm sure, will be the same. We'll have a lot more on this for you and on his visit on the late edition of Balance of Power. That's at 5 p.m. Washington time.
Yeah, we have to talk about all of those investments to the tune of hundreds of billions of dollars he's securing on his trip to the Middle East. Plenty else to discuss as well. We'll probably get back to the airplane at some point in the late edition.
We'll get to the plane,
I would imagine. Meantime, Bloomberg Business Week Daily is straight ahead here on Bloomberg TV and radio.